On November 8th, 2010, Jennifer Pan called 911. She breathlessly told the operator a horrific story. Three armed men had broken into her home in the Toronto, Canada area. They tied 24-year-old Jennifer to a banister upstairs, but the intruders had hustled her parents into the basement. While Jennifer was still tied to the banister upstairs, she heard shots from the direction of the basement. The 911 call is horrific. And right in the middle of it, Jennifer hears someone screaming and coming up the stairs. Someone who should have been dead.
Okay, ma'am, where are you? You spell the name for me, please? Dad? Ma'am. Hello? Hello? Yes? Ma'am, I need to know your address. Avenue Row, can you please spell it? Avenue, my dad just went outside screaming. Ma'am. And someone broke in and I heard shots like pops. I don't know what's happening. I'm tied up.
You have just heard the moment when a carefully crafted murder plot went horribly, horribly wrong. Police would be suspicious, and when they began to pull back the curtain on the case, what they would find would be extremely disturbing. Years of deception, a forbidden relationship, and a life that had been built on lies. This is the story of Jennifer Pan. Jennifer Pan grew up in Canada, the daughter of two very successful Vietnamese immigrants. Growing up, Jennifer was athletic and she loved ice skating. Her parents were very supportive. They spent hours shuttling her to practices and competitions. But Jennifer's parents were also very strict. They expected her to work hard and to achieve. It's unclear how Jennifer's life might have turned out if tragedy had not struck her with skating. She tore a ligament in her knee during a practice. In a single moment, she was out of skating forever. The Pans still had high expectations for Jennifer. It would never have been enough to do well in skating, and now that was off the table anyway. Her parents focused in on her grades, and that was unfortunate because Jennifer wasn't doing that well in school. In fact, in ninth grade, her grades took a turn for the worse. Her parents expected A's, but now she was averaging 70%. By 11th grade, Jennifer was clearly letting her parents down in school. But in 11th grade, at least one truly wonderful thing happened, and it started in a very unexpected way. Jennifer had an asthma attack on a school trip. A boy in her class, Daniel Wong, helped her calm down and breathe through the attack. It was wonderful having someone so calm, so focused on her. Jennifer was smitten, and the relationship quickly bloomed into romance. Jennifer's world was remarkably small. Her parents monitored her closely. They discouraged any kind of social activity. They didn't approve of dating. A friend would later write that by age 22, Jennifer had never gone to a club, gotten drunk, spent a weekend at a friend's cottage, or taken a vacation without her family. Daniel represented almost everything she didn't have: freedom, normalcy, a life without parents expecting things of you. Daniel was beautifully different from her family. He was outgoing, easygoing, laughed easily. His family welcomed Jennifer into their home. When she was with Daniel, she wasn't under the same pressure that she felt around her parents. She could simply be herself. That may help explain why their relationship survived for years despite her parents' objections to it. Jennifer finally had someone she could talk to and tell the truth, which is not what was happening with her parents. Actually, Jennifer had not been able to figure out how to tell her parents about her grade disaster, so she just didn't. It began small. Jennifer didn't want to bring home bad report cards, so she started doctoring them, fixing them up, making changes to them. She figured, why bring home disturbing news when it was within her power to create a report card that would please her parents? But to be clear, Jennifer was at least passing, and she was doing well enough that she even got an early admission to a college. Jennifer was lying to her parents, but still her life was basically working out. She was on the cusp of breaking free by going off to college. But in 12th grade, disaster hit. Jennifer was taking calculus and she failed. Without that calculus credit, Jennifer couldn't graduate, which also meant that the college she was planning to attend withdrew her admission. It was a moment of crisis. Jennifer had to make a choice: tell her parents that she had failed or keep lying. She decided to keep lying. And that one decision would alter the lives of many people and lead directly to murder. Jennifer told her parents she was starting college. She'd created false documents in the past, so she kept going. She even forged paperwork showing she had received loans and scholarships. Of course, faking an entire college education was much harder than altering a few report cards. Each day, Jennifer packed a bag and left home as if she were attending classes. Instead, she spent her days in libraries, researching subjects she was supposedly studying and taking notes to make the whole deception more convincing. Her parents had no idea. And like lies always do, this one kept growing. Eventually, Jennifer claimed she had been accepted into a pharmacology program. The new program gave her an excuse to spend several nights a week away from home. She told her parents she was staying with a friend downtown. In reality, she was living with Daniel and his family. For years, Jennifer invented classes and grades and the entire college experience, and her parents believed every word until she finally pushed things too far. Jennifer told her parents she was volunteering at a blood testing lab called Sick Kids, but this time her father, Han, became suspicious. This was a real workplace, so where was her uniform? Where was her key card? Han decided to investigate. One day, he dropped Jennifer off at the hospital and secretly asked his wife to follow her inside. Jennifer realized what they were trying to do, and she hid in the waiting area of the ER until finally her mom and dad left. The experiment by her dad had failed, but now both her parents were suspicious. It was the beginning of the end, because the next morning, Jennifer's parents called her friend, the one Jennifer supposedly was staying with 3 days a week. Normally, the friend would have known to cover for Jennifer, but it was early morning and the friend was asleep when the phone rang. Her guard was down. Without thinking, she told Jennifer's parents the truth. Jennifer wasn't there. It set the stage for an emotional confrontation that night when Jennifer got home. Jennifer had to admit something, but she couldn't bring herself to tell them everything. So she admitted to them that she didn't volunteer at Sick Kids and she was not in a pharmacology program. And as they already knew, she was not staying with her friend downtown. She was staying with Daniel's family. It was a devastating blow for her parents, particularly her dad. The family had been so proud of her, of all these achievements she had. And it turns out they were just lies. And Jennifer hadn't even told them the deepest truth, that she hadn't even graduated from high school, much less attended college. Even though they only knew part of Jennifer's lies, her parents were furious. They came up with new, stricter rules, hoping to set things straight, and most especially to keep her away from Daniel. Jennifer couldn't use a cell phone or a laptop outside her parents' presence. She couldn't see Daniel ever, at all. She had to quit all her jobs except teaching piano. She was living in a glass bubble. They tracked everything, even the odometer on her car. But for Jennifer, the most difficult part of the new rules were the ones about Daniel.
What happened with that relationship?
I hid it from my parents at first because they didn't agree with me having a boyfriend.
Okay.
And once they found out, they didn't like the fact that he was of mixed race.
Okay.
And they told me to stop seeing him.
Okay. And how did that make you feel?
That he was the person who just filled an empty void for me. So it felt that a part of me was missing.
When did you feel the part was missing?
Pardon me?
When you broke up, you felt the part was missing? Is that what you're saying?
When they first told me to stop seeing him, stop talking to him.
At first, Jennifer was able to find a few holes in the constant surveillance. Occasionally, she'd be able to sneak in a visit or a phone call with Daniel. One night, when Jennifer was feeling just desperate to see Daniel, she tried an old trick. She stuffed pillows in her bed to make it look like she was sleeping there, but instead, she snuck out to see Daniel. It might have worked, but unfortunately for Jennifer, the next morning, Jennifer's mom remembered that she had loaned Jennifer her wallet and she needed to get it back. The mom went into Jennifer's room to get the wallet and discovered that Jennifer was gone. Jennifer had pushed too far this time. She had broken rules and lied to them. Jennifer's parents gave her an ultimatum. It was all or nothing, family or Daniel, nothing in between. Jennifer chose her family over Daniel, but she was miserable without Daniel. Long, lonely days stretched out endlessly ahead of her. She thought she had hit the low, but she was wrong because she learned that Daniel, her Daniel, had moved on. He had given up on her since she could never see him, and he had started seeing a new girl named Christine. Jennifer was distraught. She came up with several desperate schemes hoping she could win him back. She told Daniel an elaborate, horrific story about how she had been gang raped in the foyer of her house. A few days later, she told him that someone had put a bullet in an envelope in her mailbox. Jennifer told Daniel about these attacks, hoping he would be drawn back to her. And she also told Daniel that she believed she knew who was behind these attacks. It was Christine, Daniel's new romantic interest. Prosecutors say that around this time, Jennifer grew increasingly desperate, so desperate that she began to consider an option that would have been unthinkable before. She began to actually mull over the idea of murdering her parents. In fact, Jennifer would admit to police that a few months before her parents were shot, she had actually paid a friend of a friend $1,500 to murder her father. Luckily, she said, the would-be hitman stiffed her. He just stopped returning her calls. Jennifer insisted that her bad experience had stopped her cold. She never, ever considered murder after that. Prosecutors believed that was only Jennifer's first try, and when that didn't work, she didn't give up. She just got more devious. According to prosecutors, Daniel and Jennifer teamed up to arrange for a hit on Jennifer's mom and dad. They did the math and decided that what with the house and the savings and the life insurance money, they would have plenty of money to begin their new lives. And this time they could be together without Jennifer's parents constantly pulling them apart. Daniel put Jennifer in touch with a man named Linford Crawford, who went by the nickname Homeboy. Crawford said he was willing to do the hit, but Jennifer would have to come up with $10,000. Jennifer would later try to distance herself from this plan, but prosecutors point to a series of damning text messages from November 2nd. It started with a Dear Jennifer style text from Daniel. He wrote saying he wanted to break things off. He wanted to be with Christine instead. This was obviously devastating news for Jennifer, but oddly, her reaction wasn't emotional. Instead, she turned to discussing Homeboy. Jennifer wrote, "So you feel for her what I feel for you, then call it off with Homeboy." Daniel writes back, "Call it off with Homeboy? You said you wanted this with or without me." Jennifer writes, I want it for me. Daniel writes, I did everything and lined it all up for you. It looks really damning. Prosecutors claim the text messages showed that both Jennifer and Daniel were involved. They had already hired Homeboy, and the plan was in motion to kill Jennifer's parents. But even more importantly, the text made Jennifer look very cold. She wanted Daniel, but if she couldn't have Daniel, then her first thought was better keep the parents alive. 6 days later, on November 8th, Homeboy texted Jennifer directly. He said, after work, okay, will be game time. And it was. Here's what prosecutors say happened. Jennifer was in her room, in bed, at 9:30 that night when her mom got home from line dancing. Jennifer went downstairs to say goodnight. But while she was there, she took the opportunity to secretly unlock the front door. At 10:02, she switched on the light in the upstairs study and a minute later turned it off. It was a signal. 3 men, including Homeboy, were waiting outside and they saw the light. And at 10:05, they entered the house. One of the intruders went straight to Jennifer's father's room, where Han was asleep in his bed. Han woke up to a gun in his face. One of the intruders forced him downstairs. Eventually, Jennifer's mom and dad were taken to the basement. Their heads were covered with blankets. Jennifer's dad, Han, was shot in the shoulder and in the face. Jennifer's mom, Bick, was shot 3 times in the head area. Jennifer called 911. When emergency personnel arrived, Jennifer's mom was dead and her dad was very close. Investigators let Jennifer spend a few hours with her dad, but then they really needed to ask her questions because they needed to capture the people who had committed this horrific crime. A few hours after the murders, Jennifer was sitting in an interrogation room. She walked through the events for police. Here is what she said happened. First, she heard unfamiliar voices downstairs. When she peeked out of her room to see what was happening, one of the intruders saw her.
He came at me and had string in his hands and tied my arms back and said, I have a gun behind your back. Do what I say. If you do what I say, then no one will get hurt.
The man forced Jennifer downstairs where her mom and dad were being held. They were all in obvious danger, but Jennifer's mom wasn't worried about herself. Instead, she begged the men not to hurt Jennifer. The intruders wanted money, so they took Jennifer back upstairs to search in her father's room. After they located money, one of the intruders tied Jennifer's arms to the banister and left her upstairs. Jennifer's parents were downstairs when Jennifer heard shots. She began screaming for her parents. Jennifer called 911 asking for help. The 911 call is utterly shocking to anyone, and probably most especially to Jennifer. In her story, Jennifer admits she's heard shots. In the prosecution story, Jennifer knows she has paid to have both of her parents killed. But right in the middle of the 911 call, as Jennifer is telling police what has happened, she suddenly hears something very unexpected. Someone in the house is screaming, someone who is supposed to be dead. Against all possible odds, her father is still alive and he is struggling up the stairs. Police were pretty quickly skeptical about Jennifer's claims. She seemed to realize that she needed to explain some things, like how, for example, she had managed to call 911 if her hands were tied and she was tied to a banister.
I had my phone on me, behind me, that I had hidden there that they didn't know about. So when I thought that they had heard them all leave and my dad ran up the stairs, I whipped up the phone and I called 911.
And there were a host of other questions that still weren't making sense to investigators. Why was the front door unlocked? And if she had her phone with her all along, why didn't she call 911 earlier? Why did these 3 men break in for money but leave the family's cars? And most importantly, Why did these intruders kill her parents but leave Jennifer tied to the banister still alive? Here was Jennifer's answer to that question.
So it's a natural concern why would they leave you alone? Why would they not do the same to you? You can't answer that question?
The only thing I can say is he said I cooperated. But I asked him to take me.
The number
with my
one
mom.
guy? The number one guy said you cooperated. Who's to say this whole thing isn't a lie? That what you're telling me is a lie? Because if you are lying, it's the most cold-blooded thing that I've ever faced in my life.
When he tells her that it's the most cold-blooded thing he's ever seen, watch the body language.
Because if you are lying, it's the most cold-blooded thing that I've ever faced in my life.
Just watch. Watch her head. Goes all the way down. Jennifer was interrogated several times. In her second interview, Jennifer admitted she was nervous.
I'm very nervous, and I
Why are
don't
you?
remember
Why are you nervous? Tell me about why you're nervous.
because I don't want to say the wrong things.
So
Because that day was a lot.
And Jennifer had good reason to be nervous because, as it turned out, her father had not been killed. He was in the hospital, seriously injured, but he was going to live. During the interviews, Jennifer wrung her hands as she spoke, and she did, in fact, seem very anxious. Investigators had to decide whether she was simply unnerved by the attack or concerned that her carefully crafted story was falling apart. Investigators tried coming alongside her, suggesting they could understand why she might have been driven to such extreme lengths as murder.
You have spent your whole life trying to live up to expectations that you can't meet, okay? And it's stressed the hell out of you. You're a 24-year-old woman being treated like a 15-year-old, okay? You've never done anything that terrible in your life, but you're being treated like you have. You're not being treated like the adult that you are. Yes, you made some mistakes, big deal. You're not the first person that has gone out and not told their parents that they're dating a guy, because in your culture they don't accept it. I understand that. I've talked to people in here that have kept that secret for their whole life from their parents. Okay, so that's not abnormal, but that puts a lot of stress on you, right? That's not easy for you, is it? No. Look at all the people around you. Does anyone else have a curfew for 9 o'clock at 24 years of age? You had no choice here, Jen, I know that. And anybody else in your situation would have done the exact same thing. The only thing different is I would say that they'd have done it a lot earlier.
The investigators tried to let Jennifer know they understood her, that they recognized the pressure her parents were putting on her, and their approach seems to have had an impact. Convinced she was understood, in the third interrogation, Jennifer opened the door. It was just a crack, but by the end of the third interview, Jennifer was done. She had not admitted to murder, but she had admitted enough facts to guarantee her substantial time in prison. Jennifer's new story was that, yes, she had invited them in there. She had unlocked the door, but the plot was against her, not her parents. The men were supposed to kill her, not her mom and dad. It was all some terrible mistake. Jennifer was not admitting to murder, but she had opened the door enough for investigators to get their foot in, and she would never again be able to close that door. Because Jennifer had now admitted that she intended for the men to be there. She intended for them to have weapons. She intended for them to kill someone. And in the course of breaking and entering into the room with weapons, innocent people have been killed. It was a crime, even if it wasn't yet intentional murder. And her new story opened Jennifer up to a host of additional questions. The most important of them all was, How did things go so wrong that the men hired to kill her instead killed her mom and dad and left her alive?
You went to this person and you asked them to do a job, and the job was for your parents. Okay, that's what we got to get to here. Okay, I know that's what really happened, Jen. Okay, that's what really happened.
Jennifer had no real answer to the logic. These hired assassins had committed exactly the opposite of the crime they supposedly were hired to commit. Just just how incompetent would they have to be to bungle things that badly? With absolutely no one believing her story, Jennifer was arrested and charged with attempted murder of her father and murder of her mother. A few months later, authorities also arrested her sometime boyfriend, Daniel, and the three intruders. Jennifer went on trial for murder in an Ontario, Canada courtroom. The trial lasted for a shockingly long, by American standards, 10 months. 50 witnesses testified, including Jennifer, who was on the stand for 7 days. During the trial, the defense was forced to admit some pretty damning facts. Two of Jennifer's friends testified that in the spring of 2010, a few months before the actual murders, Jennifer had approached people about killing her father. She wasn't just talking either. She allegedly offered one man $1,500 to do it. So the defense was forced to more or less admit that, yes, at one point Jennifer had actually considered having her father killed. But they insisted that Jennifer had abandoned the idea by the time the murders actually occurred, and that she had never planned to kill her mother or even talked about it, they argued. Only her dad. The prosecution disagreed with this. They said that by the time of the November attack, the plan had evolved. It was now a plot to kill both parents. And prosecutors brought some receipts. First, one of Jennifer's friends had extremely damaging testimony. She had talked to Jennifer on the phone just an hour before the home invasion. And on that call, Jennifer said she was going to move forward with her plan to have a staged invasion that night, which of course did happen. Even worse, the friend said that Jennifer said that both of her parents would be shot. She knew it in advance. Jennifer even said she would be tied up but not harmed, so it would look like she was a victim too. In other words, on that phone call, Jennifer had outlined the entire plot, including her plan to kill her mother. Second, Daniel did not testify at Jennifer's trial, but early on, he made a very incriminating statement to police. He said Jennifer asked him to help her off her parents. She told him her only way out was if they die and they have to be taken out of the picture. In other words, she was fully behind the plot, the prosecution said. It involved murder and it included her mother. Prosecutors also pointed to the circumstances of the murders. If Jennifer had only wanted to harm her dad, she could have had the intruders come before her mom got home from line dancing. Her dad was home alone then. Instead, she waited until both her mom and her dad were at home. And then the mom and dad were both shot side by side in identical ways. But the most dramatic piece of evidence by far was the testimony of someone who should not have been at trial at all. Someone who was shot multiple times in the head and by all rights should have been dead. But he wasn't. Jennifer's father had defied all medical odds, and he took the stand against his daughter at trial. His testimony was absolutely devastating for Jennifer. Jennifer claimed she had called out and tried to intervene as her parents were being held. Her point was that she couldn't have been involved in the murder. She wanted her parents to be saved.
And I didn't want her to get hurt, so I told her, Mom, sit down. And my mom's yelling, "Where's my daughter? I want my daughter. Where's my daughter?" And I'm yelling, "Mom, I'm here."
Hans said that simply wasn't true. As his wife and he were shuttled to the basement and then shot, Jennifer was very passive. She made no effort at all to stop what was happening. Jennifer also claimed she didn't know the intruders. Hahn said he saw something entirely different. Jennifer was standing beside one assailant who was talking softly to her, like a friend, he said. Jennifer also pointed to the fact that the intruders had tied her hands behind her back and tied her to a banister as proof she was a victim, not someone who planned the crime. But Jennifer's dad said that claim just wasn't true. During the crime, he saw Jennifer and she was just standing there. Her hands were not tied behind her back. And that was a really serious problem because if he was right, then the whole tying her hands behind her back thing must have been staged. Finally, Jennifer claimed that she was a victim, just like her mom and dad. But her dad said she was treated entirely differently from the way they were. His wife and he were told to sit on the couch. They couldn't move. Jennifer, on the other hand, was walking around the house. One of the three men pistol whipped him. And when Jennifer's mom begged the men not to hurt Jennifer, one of the men said she didn't need to worry and said, "Your daughter is very nice, so I don't hurt her." In other words, the intruders even admitted they were treating Jennifer differently. And the fact that she was never shot or injured pretty much told the story. Hahn also took the jury through a detailed explanation of the numerous lies Jennifer had told her parents for years. The implication was pretty clear. If Jennifer would lie to her parents over and over, how could the jury trust her? After 10 long months of trial, Jennifer was convicted of attempted murder of Hahn and murder of her mother. At sentencing, victims are allowed to file impact statements to talk about how the crime has impacted their lives. Here, the statements were especially heart-wrenching because the victims were also Jennifer's family. Jennifer's brother told the court that he was devastated by the events. He became depressed. Eventually, he decided he needed a clean break. He moved out of the area entirely. Hahn's statement was even more heartbreaking. Hahn said he was in constant pain and no longer able to work because of his injuries. He had anxiety attacks, insomnia, nightmares. He gave up all the activities he used to love, like gardening, like music. He desperately wanted to sell his house. He needed the money, but who would buy a house where such a terrible crime was committed? He wasn't able to sell the home, but he also couldn't live there, not after everything that had happened. So he was stuck living with relatives while the house sat empty. Hahn told the court, "When I lost my wife, I lost my daughter at the same time. I don't feel like I have a family anymore. Some say I should feel lucky to be alive, but I feel like I am dead too." Even so, Hahn seemed to dangle some hope that Jennifer could redeem herself. "I hope my daughter Jennifer thinks about what has happened to her family and can become a good, honest person someday." Jennifer's lawyer said she was open to communicating with her family if they wanted to. They didn't, and the judge entered a protective order preventing her from ever contacting them again. Jennifer's sentence for her attempted murder of her father was set to run concurrently, in other words, at the same time as Jennifer's sentence for first-degree murder of her mother. In the U.S., in many states, a prisoner can be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In other words, they will never get out and never be eligible for parole. Canada has a different system. A sentence may still be called a life sentence because it affects the prisoner for life, but for first-degree murder in Canada, the offender receives what is called a life sentence, but they become eligible to apply for parole after 25 years. They may not get it, but they can ask. Since Jennifer was convicted of first-degree murder, she was not eligible to apply for parole until 25 years passed. In other words, in roughly 2035. But on her appeal, the court overturned the murder convictions of Daniel, Jennifer, and two of the hitmen. The defendants were still guilty on the attempted murder of Jennifer's dad, but they were entitled to a new trial on the question of whether they had murdered Jennifer's mother. The reason the court overturned the conviction was because the judge gave the jury only two choices: first-degree murder or not guilty. The appellate court said the trial court also should have let the jury consider the lesser options of second-degree murder and manslaughter. That was enough to make an enormous difference for Daniel and Jennifer, and at least one of the hitmen. If they went back to trial, it was pretty clear the jury was going to find them guilty of something, be it murder, second-degree murder, manslaughter. So they skipped the jury trial and they struck very favorable plea deals. Daniel and Jennifer pled guilty to manslaughter, and one of the hitmen pled guilty to conspiracy. They will be eligible for early parole without waiting for 25 years. They may not get it, but they can apply. At this point, Jennifer still has what Canada calls a life sentence. What changed on appeal was not the word life. What changed was the mandatory 25-year wait before she could even ask for parole. For now, it is believed she is still in prison, but she is already eligible to ask for parole, less than 16 years after the murder of her mother and the attempted murder of her father. The Jennifer Pan case is one of the saddest I have ever covered. It's hard not to have at least a touch of sympathy for Jennifer. The defense was right that her parents were overbearing, and especially her father. What was so wrong with Daniel that she had to be forcibly kept from him? Daniel seemed to make her happy, and he accepted her. For most parents, that would be a pretty good match. But the choices Jennifer made are hard to accept or understand. The elaborate lies that stretched on for years are just mind-boggling. It took way more work to maintain the lies than to have finished the one high school course or even attend college. And the ultimate decision to which she has now pled guilty to pay to have her own mother terrorized and then murdered is just mind-boggling. It all comes down to the big question: why? Why would she do that? Jennifer was 24 years old. She lived in a free country. She could have walked away at any point, gotten a job in a cheap apartment, and moved on with her life. And the ultimate irony is that her plan to kill her parents failed spectacularly, so spectacularly that her chief target, her dad, became the primary witness against her. And Jennifer's sentence seems unusually short for the crime she committed. Let me know this in the comments. How do you feel about Jennifer Pan? And do you believe her sentence was sufficient? Thanks so much for watching. Please hit the like button and subscribe for more real crime, real law, and the story behind the cases. See you in the next one.